show you how to make this 6-inch block. So, but first I want to talk about my So Simple shapes, because I have several sets so far, but I wanted to let you know, in case you didn't know, that they are numbered and lettered. So here's my first one, it's Bloom. So what I mean by numbered and lettered is each one has a number but a letter in front of it. So Bloom all has A on all of them because that's my first set. The second set is Cozy Christmas, and they all start with B. And, you know, then keep continuing on. C for Fruit Salad, D for Be Happy, E for the Let's Bake, and F for Autumn Love, and G for Farmhouse Star, which is brand new, I'm going to be showing you. And these Farm Sweet Farm are H, and they will be out next month for my sew along. But I like to do them in different colors and different letters, so that when you mix them all up and make things, you know, out of several different shapes, I like you to be able to use them all together, not just for the set that they were made for, that you can separate them back up and know which set they go into, so it's not so confusing. So I started a So Simple Shapes series on my blog, free tutorials on 12-inch blocks, and that's all on there, including the finished quilt, and I used all of my sets of So Simple Shapes to make that quilt. And I'm going to be starting a new series next year doing 6-inch blocks. So this is the 6-inch block that I'm going to show you how to make. And these are the ones that I have made so far in the series. So after we do the applique, then we trim them down to 6.5 inches square. So right now they look bigger than 6-inch because they are. But that's what we have so far, and it's using all different So Simple shapes. So the first thing I want to show you is the background. So I really like to piece my backgrounds because I think it adds interest to the block, and it also is really nifty because it shows a seam here, a seam here, a seam here, you know, going this way, so it helps to center all of your blocks. So what I do is I've used these, the B background 5-inch stackers, or you can just start out with 5-inch squares. And I like to use these little art bins. But I just use 2 squares of each print, and then I make the pinwheel. So you can see that background. So here's my background square. So again, all I did was take 2 of this print and 2 of this print, and then I made half square triangles. I show you how to do that on my blog. Also in my Scrappy Project Planner, it explains all of that. So when I'm doing the applique, I like to press my seams open so that when I'm appliquing the pieces on, it lies flat. So there's your block. For the 6-inch block, you want to start, again, 5-inch squares. And when you sew them together, make sure you make them into a pinwheel shape so that you have your lines all going this way. So for the pieces, I am using, for this block, I decided to use my fruit salad set of So Simple Shapes. 3 of them in there. So here's 3 that we're using: the C1, the C7, which is the leaf, the C1 is the circle, and then the C8 for the hearts. And we're just going to talk about the shapes right now, and then I'll show you how to do the stem in a minute. So what you're going to do, I'm just going to show you an example of what I do with preparing the appliques. So I take my pencil, I take my sew-in interfacing. I've developed this so that it's a really nice weight, not too thick, not too thin, so that it doesn't tear easily, and it's easy to make the shapes. So I just simply lay my shape on there, trace around it so I have the line. Now what I've traced on here is my sewing line. Okay, so I already have one finished for you right here that I've already sewn around the line. And all you do is, after you've traced it on here, is put it on the right side of the fabric. So your line is face up and your fabric is face up when you're sewing. And on this solid, there's really no right or wrong side, so you can't really tell there. But you can kind of see where I start sewing right here. I don't back stitch. I just sew on the line, and then I over sew where I started to sew, and that secures the seam. And then I just sew off the edge so that I can start sewing another piece, so I don't have to clip my threads and waste thread and time. So once I have that prepared, then I just cut around it by an approximate 1/4 inch. So for this block, you're going to need to do 4 of these leaves. So I just trim that off by an approximate 1/4 inch, and I kind of cut to my point. I don't want to get clear to my point, but you can cut that point off a little bit flat. And then just in the interfacing only, I'm going to cut like a little X so that I can turn it. So you can pinch it apart like this, you know, and just start with a little cut. I usually use smaller scissors. Let me grab some for that. Or you can use your seam ripper if you're feeling brave, just as long as you don't cut into your fabric. It's all good, whatever you use. But I just cut a little X in there like that, and then I just turn it right side out. Some of these pieces are large, some of them are small. For the small pieces, I just do a little bit at a time. Doesn't have to look all fancy, because then I use my this point-to-point turner by Clover. I love this, and this is really essential in my applique method. And see how I just kind of go around and shape, and I usually shape it by having the interfacing up, and then I just kind of go around like this with the point part, but I'm not pushing really hard. I'm just applying a little bit of pressure and moving it at the same time. And what I'm trying to achieve is just, you know, so that I have that sideways look. I can kind of see my stitches there. But if you get a little too carried away, you might poke a hole through the fabric, especially because it's on a curve. So we've sewn it on the bias. So you just want to make sure that you apply gentle pressure until it's pushed out. I do that, and then I just take it over to the iron and just press. I just pressed on the top and just flattened it a little bit, and there's my shape. So for this block, for the leaves, I did a little bit of embroidery around here. So I used all 6 strands of my dark green Arafloss. And what I do with that is, you can mark it beforehand or you don't have to. You can just take a pencil, and I just mark short little stitches. I use this this green fabric. This is Confetti Cotton by Riley Blake, and it's my favorite green, and it's Riley green. And I use this as the common fabric throughout each block for all of the leaves. And then I did a little bit of embroidery. So all I did with that was just stitch on my marked lines now with all 6 strands. And that, I just kind of like the dimension that it adds, those chunky stitches. And so that's why I like to use all 6 strands. So I would do that at this point before I applique it. You could do it after applique, but then you would have to go through all the layers. So I just do it at this point, and that interfacing makes it really nice and keeps it stiff so that you can embroider. So also you're going to need 4 hearts for this block right here. I wanted to show you that on this shape, it has a little cleavage area, or a little V area that you'll need to clip. So after you trim, I take little sharp embroidery scissors, and here's the area that I'm talking about. You'll need to clip right to the threads, not past them. If you only go halfway, if you're afraid and only go halfway, it's still not going to lie flat when you turn it. So you need to clip just 1 clip all the way to the stitches, just like that. And then you can go ahead and put your little X back here. See how I started that cut with my seam ripper. And then it will lie flat when you turn it. So when I'm turning these hearts, I just turn 1/2 at a time. Kind of push it out a little bit. And this is where the turning tool comes in handy. That's how you do the heart, and because you did the little clipping there, that lies flat. So any of these, like the leaf pieces, because it's an outer curve, you don't need to clip that. The circles are an outer curve, you don't need to clip that. It's only inner curves and cleavage areas. And I always tell you that on each block on my blog when I'm doing my tutorial. I always tell where you need to clip just to remind you until you get the hang of it. So also I wanted to tell you when I'm stitching around here, I just use a regular stitch length, like a 2.0. I don't really use a smaller one or a larger one. I don't want to gather it up, or I don't want to make, you know, the stitching too tight. It's really secure. I've never had my stitching come undone. So that's all I do is a regular stitch. So on the circle, I want to show you how to shape the circle. A lot of people ask me about these. But again, when you turn the circle for the first time, it looks kind of crazy. And you're like, that's not going to turn out so good because I can't get it shaped right. But remember, you got to use your tool. And the circles are my favorite thing, actually, because they're the most fun to do, because you just twirl them around with this little shaper. And I'm pushing on the fabric, like all the interfacing is on top, along with the seam allowance is on top. I'm just pushing on the fabric just a little bit. And again, when I say pushing, just barely. So I'm just going around and around until it goes, you know, until it looks kind of like that. But sometimes there's little flat spots or points. So I'll just take that in between and work back and forth just a little bit to push that fabric out a little bit. And see, that fixed it right there. So, and then I just flip it over, give it a quick press with the iron, and there's my circle. So here's all my pieces all prepared and ready to go. I've got these other leaves here, and then I'll show you how I put them onto my background. Okay, so now we have all of our pieces, but I need to show you how to do the stems. So for this block, you need 4 1.5 inch long stems, but we need to prepare them using this 1/4 inch bias tape maker. This is by Clover, and this is the 1/4 inch, and it's green. So I like to cut my strips 5/8 of an inch wide, just by width of fabric. I prepare my strips a lot at the same time so that I don't have to stop and prepare them, you know, each time I'm ready for a block. So the first thing I do, this is from my Cozy Christmas fabric, and I like that it's already looks like the gingham is on the bias, even though I didn't cut it on the bias because these are straight. So I only cut my strips on the bias when I have to do curving in a block. But because these are all straight, then we just cut them across the width of the fabric. So first I cut a little point in the end there so it's easier to go through the maker. And then I use just a little bit of starch. You can use whatever kind you want. This is Best Press. And I just get it a little bit wet. I don't really saturate it, but it just kind of helps to shape your stem after you run it through the maker. So I don't let it dry all the way. Obviously, I want it kind of wet. So I like to feed it right through here, the point going in through there. And you can just thread it through there, like from the top where the opening is. You can take pen, scissors, or fingernail, whatever you need to do till the point comes out like this. And see how it's just almost the same width as this opening. It just bends down a little. That's how you want it. And I start over here. I put my iron down so that I have about 1 inch out, and then I put my iron right next to it, but I don't touch the metal because it'll get really hot and then you won't be able to hold on to it. But I just pull on the maker at the same speed that I pull the iron. And see how I'm just making it flat like that. And you just keep going. You can move it up or down or do the whole length of your ironing board. I'm just following. So for this, we just need straight seam. See how that's now, those raw edges are folded under. I normally just let it lie here and cool for a minute, but I just kind of wanted to show you that. And even though this is not cut on the bias, just while we're here, I should just show you something that when I do need to curve something and this is cut on the bias, then this is the point where I curve it. I just, you know, kind of turn it like that and it stays. This will curve a little bit, even though you've cut it straight, but if you really need curves, I would definitely cut this on the bias, the fabric. Okay, so now what you do is you just cut 4 1.5 inch pieces from there, and that's how you do the bias. You can do all different widths. For this block and for the rest of this quilt series, I'm just going to be using this 1/4 inch bias tape and the same stem fabric. It goes well with the Riley green. So I kind of like to have the same, at least 1 or 2 same fabrics in each block just to kind of pull the whole quilt together. And so that's what I've chosen to do, is use the same green and the same stem fabric. These 2 pieces are for my upcoming Farm Girl Vintage collection, the little circle and the hearts. When I'm laying my blocks out, you know, to prepare for applique, I always glue baste and pin at the same time. I pin first and then I glue baste, but I'm always using my design boards because I'm pinning to it. So it's kind of like a bulletin board. And I usually start from the center out. So what I want to do is start with my circle, and it's really easy to center it because of all these seams. I know where that goes. So I'm just going to put my circle there. You know, at this point, if you're worried about centering it, you can always take your ruler, you know, and make sure it's like the same, you know, apart, like it's 3 3/4, you know, all the way around. But what I do is I take my applique pins. These are one of my sets of pretty pins. These are called applique, and I know they're longer than you may have seen normal applique pins. I do have mini applique pins that they're really short, but I use these to stick in my design board when I'm glue basting. So the first thing I do for the center circle is I just stick a pin right into my design board and leave that there. So I'm not gluing yet, I'm just lining it up and setting everything down. So with my stems, they're going to go next because I'm layering everything. And what I do is use Sue Daly's glue, which I love so much. I call it Sue glue, and I use it for everything. So I love the little tip that it has on it. But these are just 1.5 inches long. There's not much showing, but I usually tuck it under by 1/4 inch there, and then the heart, you know, will go on top. So what I do is I just put it right on the seam, just a little skein. I barely push so that just a little bit of glue comes out. And then I tuck it under the circle by 1/4 inch, and it's right on this line. So see, you can see that it's straight and centered because the seam is right between that 1/4 inch. And then I just go around and do the same thing. Just a little line there, little line there. I try not to get a lot of glue on these bias strips, just right down the middle so that there's no glue to go through to needle. You can, but it's just easier if you don't have to. So I'm just tucking these under, like I say, by about 1/4 inch. So there's my stems. Now that I have my stems underneath there, I know that my circle hasn't moved where I measured it. Now I can go ahead and lift up the edges and just put a dot. I use this glue just like I would use a pin, and I just put a little dot under there. Like, I don't put a ton of glue, but just enough to hold it down. Okay, so there's that. Now I know I can put my hearts, you know, next. Now on my blog, I always tell you like how long the measurement is. And right here you can see that there's 1 inch between the bottom of the heart and the edge of the circle. So I just like to keep my ruler down here. And then when I go to do my heart, I just put like a few pieces of glue, and I don't put it around the edge, like I say, so I don't have to needle through it. And I know that it goes 1 inch up from the circle, and I know this little cleavage area that we trimmed goes right on that seam. So that's centered, and that's exactly where that goes. So then I go around and do my hearts. I really love using the glue because then I can take my pins out. Just want to make sure that's an inch. You don't ever have to eyeball anything, especially knowing that you're going to be trimming this block down. You don't want to cut these off. So you just want to trust my measurements, or measure first yourself so that you know you're not going to cut off the blocks. Cut off the edges of the hearts. Sorry, not the blocks. So how I do that is I take my 6.5 inch trim it ruler, and you can just lay it down there. Take that pin out now. You can lay it there on the seam. See where all these lines line right up with everything. And I can see inside this window, this is your 1/4 inch seam allowance where this aqua is, but inside this window, that's what my finished block is going to look like once it's sewn into the quilt. So you can see by using these measurements that there's about 1/4 inch, you know, away, which is typically about what I do. So these are really invaluable. They're nice for trimming up, but I use them every time I'm setting up my blocks too. That's how I knew that this was 1 inch apart, because I had already measured those, you know, according to my 6.5 inch trim it ruler. And again, I'm going to lay that there, center it. Once your glue is down, you can move it up or down before it dries. It takes a minute to dry. I'll show you how I do that. Okay, so now we have the leaves left. And again, you can come over here and measure if you want to, but it's just barely tucked under. This point is tucked under by 1/4 inch. So before everything's dry, like underneath the circle, I hurry and just stick the leaves in. Pick that up. And I kind of just eyeball this part, like I know I can see that that's about the same width apart there. And I'm just going to continue going around and lay these out. This is a version, I didn't stitch these leaves, just so that I could quickly get them on here to show you how I do this part. But if you don't care to do the stitching around them, that's fine. This is what it looks like. This glue dries clear, and you can pull your pieces off. I really like it because you can move it if you need to. After it's dry, you can even move it, but you just have to tug on it just a little bit, which I really like because that means it's secure. But yet, if you change your mind or you want something else there instead, it's always changeable, and I like to change my mind. So, okay, so now when I've got that down, I usually use a lot more of my pins. When I have a bigger block, it's all pinned. And then when it's all pinned and glued, then I lay it there. I put my ruler on top right here, and I usually put something heavy on there. What I've been using lately is this cute bee that my friend Jo painted for me because it's nice and heavy. She painted a rock, and I just put it on there, and it takes like 5 or 10 minutes to dry, and it's nice and secure, and then I can just pull it right off my design board and applique. When I applique my blocks, I like to do hand applique. Sometimes I do machine applique as well. So I'm going to do a couple different videos. In one I'm going to show you how to do hand applique, and then a couple different versions for machine.